Good afternoon, everyone. This is Sarah Neiswanger, and on behalf of all of us on at the National Glass Association, thank you for making time in your busy day to join us for this month's installment of Thirsty Thursday. The first thing I'd like to cover with you is the controls for this Teams meeting. In the bottom of your screen, you should have a control panel that shows icons for the camera, microphone, chat, and other controls. Please click on the microphone icon to mute yourself while our speaker Tom is presenting. You may also want to make sure your camera is turned off by clicking that icon until you see the slash covering it. We will make time for questions at the end of the presentation today. To ask a question, please click on the chat feature in Teams. This is the speech bubble icon to the right of the three dots. When you want to ask a question, click on the icon to open the chat sidebar on the right side of the screen. And to ask a question, simply type it into a new message box and an NGA staff member will ask the presenter to address it at the end of the session. As you've likely seen, you may join the audio portion of the presentation through your laptop audio or using the telephone dial information as it appears on your screen. Should one of your audio methods cause you difficulties, please do exit and try entering again using the other alternative. A reminder too, please mute yourself for the duration of the presentation to avoid any audio background conflicts. NGA is proud to be a trusted resource for our members during these uncertain times. Please see the NGA website for more information on industry-specific news as it relates to COVID-19 and materials we're making available to our members in the industry. Next week, on Wednesday, April 22nd, NGA is launching a new webinar series called Now and Next, Surviving the COVID-19 Crisis. In the first Now and Next webinar, financial expert Mark O'Terry will provide insights on emergency financing options for companies during COVID-19. His webinar, all about SBA loans, will take a deep dive into the financing options currently available for companies affected by the pandemic. Terry is a managing director of Commercial Capital, a factoring company and provider of invoice financing to companies in the glass industry, and he has appeared as a regular financial columnist in Glass Magazine. So we hope you will join us next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern to hear that 30-minute presentation as well. Now, I'm pleased to introduce today's presenter, Tom Zaremba of Roetzel and Andress. Tom has more than 30 years of experience representing Fortune 500 companies in civil litigation and financial institutions in restructurings, reorganizations, and solvency proceedings. Tom's practice focuses on advising and representing clients in all aspects of the development of building codes and standards, including proceedings before the U.S. Department of Energy, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the International Code Council, the National Fenestration Rating Council, the National Fire Protection Association, ASHRAE, ANSI, and the California Energy Commission. His clients include a number of worldwide glass manufacturers and trade associations representing the glass industry. He also works directly with NGA and its members through the Glazing Industry Code Committee. Tom, welcome.
Welcome, and thank you very much. And just before we get started, I was delighted to learn that we would not have the video on showing the participants or any of the participants, including me. I was on a video conference call with three others several days ago, and about halfway through the discussion, one of the fellas put himself on mute and got up to get himself a cup of coffee. And while he was seated at his desk, where the camera could only see him from the waist up, he had a shirt and a tie on. When he got up and walked across his room, his office, to get coffee, it was pretty clear he didn't have his pants on. So it was a bit embarrassing for him. He was on mute, and one of the other participants had to call him and tell him that he was walking around half dressed on the video conference call. So I was delighted to find out we were not going to have that today. And if anybody can't hear me, let Sarah know in a message, and hopefully we can remedy that. Some of the things we hope you're going to learn is what exactly is wired glass, where is it likely to be installed, how it behaves in a fire and in human impact, and how wired glass can safely be used in applications both in the United States and Canada, and also to identify some alternatives to the use of wired glass. So next, please. Basically, wired glass is a polished, annealed glass. It is not a float glass. It is actually polished with the layer of wire, either in typically a square pattern, which is called Georgian wired glass, or in a diamond pattern, as you see on the right side of your screen, which is just simply a diamond pattern. But the important thing is to realize is that it is an annealed glass. Next, please. The wire is embedded inside the glass for a number of reasons. Next, please. First, it was used often in cases where someone wanted to create an appearance of security. A good example is a number of years ago, probably a decade ago, you oftentimes saw jewelry displayed in jewelry stores in cases enclosed in wired glass. You also would often find wired glass in skylights. The reason being is that unlike the appearance of security, if there was a breakage in the skylight, the wire would hold the glass together and prevent it from falling on occupants below. The other thing that it was most frequently used for was for fire-rated applications. Next, please. Wired glass is used in fire-rated applications primarily because it prevents flame, smoke, and hot gases from passing through it for 45 minutes in a fire test. And I don't know how many of you know the details of fire tests, but in a 45-minute period, a fire test will expose the glass to temperatures in excess of 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Next, please. Why is it a good fire-rated material? It's a good fire-rated material because when it's exposed to fire at about the first 100 degrees centigrade or a couple hundred degrees Fahrenheit, the glass, the annealed glass, cracks. But at the same time, the wire embedded in the glass holds the glass together in its frame. As the temperature increases beyond 100 degrees centigrade, the glass actually softens and begins to heal all the cracks that were created initially at the 100 degree centigrade mark. So it actually seals itself in a way that will prevent even smoke from penetrating it or hot gases and certainly flames. Next. Another important aspect of the use of the wire embedded in this glass is that following a 45-minute fire test, both the fire window test, NFPA 257, and the door fire test, NFPA 252, require that the glass in the door or the fire window be struck with a hose stream. And basically, there's a picture of it on the right. It resembles a fireman's hose, and it's intended to determine after the end of the 45-minute fire test, is this product still going to remain intact when struck with the thermal shock of a hose stream? And most often, wire glass, although annealed, the wire would hold the glass together and it would survive the integrity test of a hose stream following the fire test. Next, please. Now we come to the big question. This was the controversy back 15 years ago that was raised yearly and annually at the building code hearings. Is wired glass a safety glazing? Next, please. Back before 2012, ANSI Z97.1 and 16 CFR 1201 defined what a safety glazing was. And 16 CFR 1201, the federal standard, which was adopted in 1970 or 74, I forget, exempted the use of wire glass in fire-rated applications, so that even in a hazardous location, it allowed wire glass to be used if it was also a fire-rated application. Likewise, back in those days, ANSI Z97.1 had 3 impact categories. The first one was at 100 foot-pounds or 12-inch drop height. Wired glass was able to pass that test. The next one, however, at 18 inches drop height for 180, I believe it is, foot-pound impact, wired glass would fail. And then, of course, at 48 inches, which was the third category of drop height that ANSI had, or 400 foot-pounds, it would not survive. But back before 2012, all 3 categories, 12-inch drop, 18 and 48-inch, were all categorized in the United States as safety glazing. And up until even more recently, as we'll get to in a moment, in Canada, the only safety glazing standard that existed in Canada was for wired glass, and it was at a 12-inch drop height or 100 foot-pounds. So is it now a safety glazing? No. Wired glass has been eliminated from the safety glazing category, both in the United States building codes and in ANSI Z97.1. The 12-inch drop height has been eliminated from ANSI, and monolithic wired glass, that means just annealed wired glass with no organic or other coatings on it, is no longer considered a safety glazing in the United States. Chapter 24 of the International Building Code, of course, defines very specifically all of the areas which are considered hazardous locations under the building code. Automatically included is every door, side lights near a door, and certain glazed panels or windows that are susceptible to accidental human impact. But in all of those applications, you are no longer allowed to use monolithic wired glass because it is no longer considered a safety glass. So what do you use? Well, you have to use tempered or laminated, essentially, or a form of glass that is able to withstand the rigors of an 18-inch or a 48-inch drop height using the ANSI impactor. Next, please. So what about Canada? Well, in 2017, Canada eliminated its wired glazing safety standard. It dropped it and created a new safety standard, which is at the bottom of your screen there, CAN/CGSB-12.1-2017. And what that stands for is Canadian and the Canadian General Standards group that develops the standards for Canada. And it is a group that was brought together, met for about 2 years, and developed this new safety standard that is essentially the same, the equivalent, I should say. It's not the same because it uses different language, but it is essentially equivalent to ANSI Z97.1. So what that means is that currently, if you have a product that passes the US ANSI standard for safety glazing, it will also pass the new Canadian standard. And earlier this year, as a matter of fact, in February and March, a special task group was established by the Canadian Commission on Building and Fire Codes, and it was tasked with the job of re-establishing throughout the Canadian National Building Code those areas that had to be changed to adopt this new standard. They did their work, and so the 2020 Canadian National Building Code will reference throughout the entirety of the new code in 2020 the new safety standard for glazing applicable to all hazardous locations, and it will no longer reference the old wired glass safety standard. Next. Now, the question is, what about this? Can wired glass actually pass safety glazing standards? Next. It can. I guess some of the material that I was intended to put in there I missed. But let's go back one if we can, Sarah. So let me answer this question. The question is, can you make wired glass pass a safety glazing standard? And the answer is yes. Wired glass can be organically coated, and with that organic coating, just like a laminated glass or other forms of annealed glass or glass ceramics that have a organic coating to hold the pieces of the glass together after impact, with an organic coating, wire glass can be made to pass ANSI 18-inch, I'm not sure about 48, but certainly an 18-inch drop height test. Likewise, there are a number of organic coatings in the marketplace that will pass the fire test. Some will and some won't. So if it's a fire-rated application and you want to use wire glass, and it's also a hazardous application, you need to apply an organic coating that is capable of passing the fire test, either the window fire test or the door fire test, and the ANSI C97.1 test. So the answer is yes, you can use it. Then the other question is, are there other applications where wired glass can be used in its annealed monolithic form? And that answer is yes. If you take, for example, imagine a transom light above a door, that is not a hazardous location. It is not susceptible to accidental human impact. And as a consequence, you could use annealed glass. But if it's in a corridor that requires a fire rating, and the fire rating is 1 hour or less, you could use wire glass without an organic coating in that application under the current building codes. By the way, wire glass will start to fail a fire test after 45 minutes. However, in most applications, glass that lasts for 45 minutes in the fire test is given a 1 hour rating. Next, please. So what are alternatives to wire glass in fire-rated applications? Well, one of the primary alternatives is glass ceramics. Glass ceramics has a zero coefficient of expansion. That means that when exposed to heat and then rapid cooling, it doesn't expand or contract, and therefore it won't break. As a result, it can pass fire, well, because of its chemical composition and its molecular composition, it can pass a fire exposure in the fire test for as long as up to 3 hours. Now, wire glass, as I mentioned, is limited to 45 minutes, but ceramics can pass for up to 3 hours. Now, ceramics are also a type of glazing material that will shatter in a non-safe breaking pattern if exposed to human impact. So as a result, to be used in fire-rated hazardous locations, ceramics do have to be organically coated. In addition to which, again, at the end of these very long fire tests that it's capable of preventing the passage of smoke, flame, and hot gases, it can also withstand the rapid cooling and integrity testing of a hose stream test following the fire test. Next, please. And in the last dozen years or so, there have been materials that have an intumescent filling. So they're either layers of tempered and laminated tempered glass or laminated annealed glass, which are on the exterior, both the number 1 and 2 surfaces, with a sandwich in between of an intumescent product. And in a fire exposure, although the exterior coating on the fire side of these intumescent products may crack, what is most important about the product is that the intumescent layer goes from clear, as you see it in the right-hand side of the screen, to opaque. When it goes opaque, that intumescent layer, it blocks not only then the smoke, flame, and hot gases, but it also blocks thermal transfer. And as you all probably are aware, glass, whether it's glass ceramics, laminated glass, a tempered glass, or any other form of glass, simply does not block much thermal transfer. So if there is a hot heat source on one side of a piece of glazing, you'll also find with most glass types that heat will transfer through the glass and also affect the non-fire or non-flame side of the glazing. Intumescent products are different. They stop not only the flames and so forth of the fire, but they also keep the other side of the glass as cool as a cucumber. I've actually had an opportunity to experience a several thousand degree flame on an intumescent product and touch the non-fire side, and it was cool to the touch. And that was after about 30 minutes. So those are very remarkable products, and they are an alternative to the use of wire glass. Next. Here's where things get a little tricky. Suppose that you have someone who has a pre-existing, that is an installation of wired glass, monolithic wire glass, in a fire or non-fire but hazardous location, and it was installed before the rules changed in 2012 in the US, and as they are now changing in Canada, to prevent the use of wire glass in those applications. What do? Nothing? Do you have to replace it? Do you have to modify the glazing? And then finally, what if it breaks and you have to replace it? Is the result any different? Let's take a look. If it was installed when it was still legal, let's say in the year 2000, when it was in a fire-rated but hazardous location, if that wire glass was installed when it was legal to install it, it does not become illegal because the building codes have since changed. Let me repeat that. If it was installed legally and the building codes change to make that use of that glass in a new construction illegal, the pre-existing installation is not illegal. However, is it something that you should be concerned about? Yes. Why? You have to be very concerned about it because when the building code changes, it creates a new standard of care. It now says, as opposed to 1970 when it was acceptable to put wire glass in that hazardous location, the new standard of care in 2012 and beyond in the United States is no. It would be a violation of the standard of care to use wire glass in that application. So what happens then if this legal installation causes injury to somebody through an accidental human impact. If there is the potential for litigation, it is very likely under those circumstances that the injured party is going to bring forward in court that the installation, although legal at the time and still legal at the time of the injury, nevertheless violated a current standard of care that the owner, number one, should have been aware of and should have done something to resolve. So even though the building codes will not require an update of that wire glass that was legal when installed, you may want to consider what will happen in the event of an injury resulting in a lawsuit and the current standard of care is brought into court to show that the owner is in violation of a standard of care, even though not technically in violation of a building code provision. Now let's take the situation where you have simply a wire glass view panel in a door or in a side light or other areas where they were used back in before the 2012 switch in the building codes, and somebody just breaks it. They throw something, a ball against it or something, and the wire glass breaks. Can you replace it with wire glass? No. If you break that glass, it has to be brought up to date to use a safety glazing. You cannot replace it and claim that it was legal when it was originally installed, but at a time where it was replaced, it was illegal. No, that doesn't work that way. You have to replace it. NFPA 80, which is the installation and maintenance standard for fire windows and fire doors, is going to make that clear in the next edition. At the last meetings in New Orleans late last year rather, that was discussed with some detail, and that is going to be brought out in the new code. Next. I think we're at questions.
Yes, thank you, Tom. As a reminder, everyone, per the instructions on this screen, you can use the icon in your toolbar that looks like a speech bubble to enter your questions into the chat. We have just a couple of minutes left, so I don't see any questions asked at the moment, but we can continue to wait, and Tom can address questions or offer any additional commentary at this time.
One of the things I forgot to mention, I'll bring up now. One of the advantages that wire glass, that made it so popular, was that it was cuttable in the field. You could take a stock sheet into the field and cut it to size and put it in a frame in the field. And so that was one of the advantages that made it. And at one time, before 2012, there were probably about 9 million square meters of wire glass being imported from both England and Japan into the United States every single year. So there's bound to be quite a bit of wire glass still out there in the buildings that were built before 2012.
Great, thank you. We have received one question. Okay. Tom, you had mentioned 45-minute products are awarded 60-minute ratings. Can you explain how?
Yeah, it was a kind of a fluke. There were things called corridors. They're not found as frequently in modern buildings as they were before the year 2000. But there were corridors that separated tenant spaces in office buildings and in shopping centers and in schools, that separated classrooms, that all required a 1-hour fire rating. Corridors that are used as a part of exiting a building, where when a fire breaks out, there's a fire exit area that leads you outside the building. Those were rated as 1-hour corridors. And wire glass was the only type of glass that had a fire rating at all, and it would only last 45 minutes. So the building codes assigned glazing with a 45-minute rating a 1-hour protection rating.
Interesting. Thank you. There are a few more questions that have come in. The next one is one-sided fire-rated glass safe to use?
There's only one application where it's permitted in the code, and that is in an exterior wall where the exterior wall of the building is within 5 or 10 or a certain number of feet of a property line or another building. And that is intended to prevent horizontal fire spread from one building to another. Otherwise, except for that one limited application, all fire-rated glazing has to be fire tested on both sides.
Okay, next question. If you apply a film and it's ANSI tested, can you assume it will pass the fire test, or do you have to get it tested for fire?
Yes, you have to get, the answer is no, you cannot assume that it will be past the fire test. There are basically two ways that film will react in a fire. Some of it will flame. That is, it'll catch fire and actually burn. Others do not burn. They simply char and slough off the glass. Under both the fire window and the fire door test, if the film catches fire or flames, it can't be used. You'll fail the fire test. So a film that chars and sloughs off as opposed to catches fire and burns has to be used.
Okay. Next question. When you're referring to organic coatings, are you referring to factory applied films, such as for both wired glass and ceramics?
Yes, and let me explain that. In order to, let's take a glass installation where you find a piece of wire glass that was installed before the ban on its use in hazardous locations, and you apply a film to it. That probably makes the wire glass safer, but it will not pass ANSI Z97. It cannot by definition, because the test on the filmed organic film product has to be done before the installation. So retrofitting with films is probably a good idea. It'll probably be safer, but you cannot say it now passes the code requirement of a Z97 test, because it doesn't.
Okay. Next question. It appears there are different gauges of wire. Is there a standard gauge, or do you choose a matching gauge based on glass thickness?
No, there's a standard gauge wire. Currently, there's only 3 locations, and they're all in Japan and Indonesia that make wire glass. There used to be a location in England, but that was shut down a number of years ago after the 2012 change in building code requirements. So there's only 3 locations. They're all in Asia, and they use a standard gauge wire in their glass.
Excellent. Thank you. That concludes our questions for today, and I believe that we are all just a little bit past time, so we will conclude this webinar as well. Tom, thank you for your time and preparation for today's webinar. To our attendees, his contact information is on the screen. We've been recording this meeting, and we'll be posting it on glass.org as well for later viewing, and so that you may download the handouts.
Thanks, everybody.
Agreed. Thank you for coming. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.